I know that several of you already know the race result, but I'm not gonna spoil that for anybody who doesn't know how the race went, so I'm gonna get straight into the race recap now. The race started at 7 a.m. and I figured 5 a.m. would be plenty of time for me to do everything that I needed to before the race. Right when I woke up, I had a cup of black tea and a slice of bread with a little bit of peanut butter and a banana sliced on it. That's mostly all I ate or drank before the race, but I did have a little bit of water that morning too. But I did a really good job hydrating the 2 days before, so I felt like that job was done. The weather that morning included a temperature of 35 degrees Fahrenheit and winds of about 6 or 7 miles per hour, so pretty ideal for racing. Some people thought it was a little bit cold, but I thought it was pretty nice. So I just kind of hung around the hotel room for a little while and relaxed and did some mobility drills and put all my race gear on, and I was out the door at 6:15 to start warming up 45 minutes before the race. From the hotel, I warmed up straight to my corral and finished my jogging in there. To get into the athlete development program corral, I had to go through the A corral, and the ADP corral was not a very large area for warming up or anything, so it was really just a lot of standing around before the race started. I was moving around a little bit still to try to stay a little bit warm, and of course I had all my warm clothes on still, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Most people were hanging out right at the front of the corral so that as soon as they open the gate they can get their best position possible on the starting line, but I didn't figure it was that big of a deal because it's a 13-mile race, so there's going to be plenty of time for it to thin out and I'll be able to run my own race anyways. So now before we start the actual race, I want to talk about my race plan a little bit, which really wasn't much of a race plan. I was planning to run by effort for pretty much the entire race, and I was going to hope that I could measure it out appropriately to get me to a finishing time that correctly lined up with my training. I was planning on starting my watch at the beginning of the race just for record keeping purposes, but again, it's a non-GPS watch, so there's no way to know what pace I'm running in real time until I actually see what the mile split is. Over the past couple weeks, I had been visualizing myself just running pretty quick with no effort and carrying that for a long time, so that's what I was focused on at the beginning of the race. So the race started, and again, I was just thinking about running with no effort. I passed a ton of people in the first mile just because, like I said, a lot of people are over anxious to get to the front of the line to get the best spot possible, but it wasn't that big of a deal just running to the outside and running past those people. Coming up on the first mile split, I had no idea what to expect. To me, I thought I was going to run something around 5:20 because that's what it felt like. To my surprise though, I went through in 5:08 and that felt pretty good. So still very early in the race, obviously, 12 miles to go. I'm still focused on running with no effort, and I felt like the second mile was going to be a little bit slower, maybe 5:15. Again, it was a nice surprise seeing an even faster mile than the first mile, right at 5:07. So same old story for mile 3, still trying to run with no effort. I'm not even a quarter into the race at this point, so I'm not trying to exert myself in any way. Over the course of that third mile, I closed that gap on Jordan a little bit, and again, a very nice surprise, a 5:02 third mile. Right after 3 miles, I caught up to Jordan and ran next to her for just a bit. At this point, some different things are going through my mind, like should I say good job Jordan or good luck Jordan, but I tried to just be a normal dude and just not say anything and run by. I mean, I'm running next to the second fastest American female marathoner of all time, so that's kind of cool. She was definitely hogging all the attention from the crowd though. So now a little bit past 5K, roughly a quarter of the way through the race, still feeling good of course. I kept seeing these mile splits that were so much quicker than I was expecting, but I didn't let that alter my race plan. I was never thinking, man, I'm running way too fast right now, I need to slow down. That's why I like racing by effort so much, because normally that's gonna lead you to the best result possible on that day. If your plan is to stick to a pace no matter what, you might either be holding yourself back or you could be going out way too hard. So throughout the fourth mile, still nothing's changing. I'm still picking off people one by one, and I like to listen to people's breathing as I catch them. I would run next to somebody for just a bit, listen to their breathing, compare it to my own, and notice that everybody else was working a lot harder than I was. So that was just a confidence builder every time I would catch somebody. The fourth mile had slowed to just under 5:10, but I was still feeling fantastic at this point. Somewhere between the fourth and fifth mile, I caught up to a guy that I ran next to for quite a bit. I was thinking about how early in the race it was, so I didn't want to get too aggressive here and make sure I make it to 10K just fine still. So this is where the power of group running comes into play, and it definitely decreases that perceived effort. So while running next to this guy who was still breathing harder than I was, I ran 5:02, and it felt like a pretty easy mile still. So now after mile 5, here's where things got a little bit interesting. At this point in the race, I became aware of the lead women's pack up ahead of me and the video truck in front of them. On the back of that video truck, they had a clock that had a running time on it, and it also had a clock that would tell them what their last kilometer was and what their projected finish was. The first time that I saw that projected finish time, it said somewhere around 106.50. So what I had been telling everybody is that my goal was to run under 108, and the expectation of myself was to give that an honest shot. What I didn't tell everybody, and I didn't tell this to one person, I didn't write it down anywhere, but somehow I felt like if every single one of the stars aligned, I was capable of under 107. I didn't know how, and I couldn't explain it if I looked at all my training, and of course I've never done a half marathon before, so I don't know exactly what my training indicates, but I didn't think it looked like sub 108 training. When I was thinking about the individual mile pace of running 108, that's 5:11, I couldn't fathom that. So how in the world did I think under 107 was possible at a 5:06 pace? Like I said, I couldn't explain it, but I just felt like I could run under 107. So seeing that projected finish time on the clock reignited that gut feeling that I could run under 107, and I knew catching up to that pack was my ticket to a sub 107. I figured they would be slowing down at some points during the race, but these are literally the best female distance runners in the world. If they're on pace for under 107 at this point, I just knew they were going to be under that barrier because these women are fighting for the win, and they will be finishing hard in the last couple miles. So that women's pack is pretty far in front of me still, and I'm not even halfway through the race yet, so I didn't want to catch it immediately, and I wanted to still save a lot of effort for the last half of the race. So in the meantime, I kept running with the same guy that I was running with for a little while. I missed the 6 mile marker, so I don't know exactly what my 6th mile was, but I did go through 10K in about 31:40. Right after 10K, the guy that I was running with fell off the pace, and I was on my own now for a little bit. So now getting to the 7th mile split, I had been unaware of what pace I was running for a little while longer now. That was probably really good for me because it allowed me to really focus on effort still for a little bit longer. But what do you know, I'm still rolling along at this point, and for miles 6 and 7, I split a 10:08. So now at this point, I'm finally over halfway into the race, and I think it's okay to start taking some risks now. Being on my own for most of mile 7 now, I figure that it's worth the effort to try to catch that women's pack to hopefully decrease my perceived effort for a lot of the hardest miles of the race. So over the course of the 8th mile, I increased my effort just a bit to start working up to that women's pack. During that, I passed a couple other guys who were running in no man's land, and I did the whole thing of checking their breathing and comparing it to my own, and that was still building confidence for me. So hitting the 8th mile split now, I see that I just ran a 4:59, and that was pretty cool because part of me was thinking throughout the week that it'd be kind of cool to hit a sub 5 mile at some point during the race, and I wasn't really trying for it, but it just happened. So I just keep seeing every mile split being so much faster than I was expecting, and literally every single mile I'm just building confidence and realizing more and more how special of a race this is and how great of an opportunity this is. So over the course of the 9th mile, I finally caught up to that women's pack, and I kind of kept my distance from them to the side. At this point, their pack consisted of 7 East African women and Molly Huddle, who was definitely on pace for the American record at this point. I wanted to keep my distance from all of those women just because with how tiny they are and with how long my strides are, I didn't want to get tangled up with them in any way. I knew that if I sent one of them to the ground somehow, oh man, I would have been hated by thousands that were watching this because I was pretty sure I was getting lots of camera time at this point being right next to those women. So I started to put a very, very slight gap on that women's pack, but it was probably no more than a minute that they just made that right back up. When crossing that 9th mile right at 5:08, this is when the first ounce of doubt started to creep into my mind. I was definitely feeling the effort of catching up to that women's pack over the 8th and 9th miles, and I was wondering if the wheels were going to fall off sometime soon. I wasn't feeling terrible at this point, but I was still a little bit worried. I was worried just because I was in completely uncharted territory right now, and I was running so stinking fast compared to what I thought was realistic for me. Sometime during the 10th mile now, I found myself running right next to Molly Huddle. The same thoughts went through my mind with her as they did with Jordan Hesse earlier in the race, but I just settled on saying nothing because I figured I needed every bit of oxygen that I could take at this point. Earlier in the week, I had actually joked with a friend that I should ask Molly Huddle for an autograph as she passes me, but I thought that was a pretty tall order because that would assume that I'd be in front of her at some point. But it turned out that it was the opposite way around. I was the one passing her. So thinking about that as I'm running next to Molly Huddle brought a little bit of comedy into my mind and helped me keep my mind off the effort. So at this point now, I decided that I just need to do the best I could to hang on to this women's pack. Crossing the 10th mile at 5:04, that put my 10-mile time at under 51 minutes, and my mind was just freaking blown at this point. Even though each individual mile split had been surprising me throughout the race, I was never really thinking about the cumulative time until that point. Going into the 11th mile now, I knew coming in that this was probably going to be one of the most difficult miles because it was at the end of the longest straightaway on the course, and obviously a part that's really difficult mentally and physically in the race. So I'm still just hanging on to the women's pack, and right as we round that turn, we hit the 11th mile split and I see a 5:07. At this point now, there's only 2 miles to go, and there are no turns left to the finish. We're headed straight that way. So this is when that pack started to break up a little bit. One of the women put in a pretty good surge, and that strung out our pack, and everybody's running in a line now.
And this lead pack, it's very exciting. You don't normally see a pack this big at a pace this hot, this late in the race.
I think to give you an idea how fast they're going, look at the 2 guys trying to hang on.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy in the orange is all out. I mean, this is everything he can to try to hang on, and he's going to run a great time. This is a good men's time.
I remember looking ahead and seeing the skyline of downtown Houston and thinking that it looked pretty far away, but it wasn't too much further to go. I'm no longer thinking about running economy at this point. I'm just trying to save every second that I can and try to hang on and be tough. So at this point, my shoulders are probably hunching up a little bit. I'm probably overstriding a little bit more, making my heel strike a little more evident, but I didn't care. So now hitting that 12th mile at another 5:07, there's just over 1 mile to go. Once I made it back into downtown, I knew that the finish line was not going to be far away, so I was just trying to hold it together. The last couple miles were kind of a blur. I was no longer paying attention to the race for the female title in front of me. I was no longer aware of the video truck in front of me. But like I said, I was just trying to hold everything together because I knew I was running a pretty special time. Finally, I rounded the last bend into the finish line, and the first time that I saw the clock, it said 1:06:40. So I started putting everything I could into the last bit of the race to make sure that I ended up on the right side of that barrier. The clock was actually right at 1:07 flat as I crossed the line, but since I had started several rows back on the start, I actually had a few seconds to spare there, so since I started 5 seconds back, my finishing time was actually 1:06:55. So this is pretty much the greatest feeling in the world that you can experience in distance running. Literally every single one of the stars that could align did align for me, and that pipe dream of under 1:07 actually happened for me. It's pretty crazy to think that even if one little thing is off, then I probably don't run under 1:07. Like after seeing the first mile split, if I think, man, I'm running too quick right now, I need to slow down a little bit, then I probably don't break 1:07. If I take an unplanned day off somewhere, maybe that's the difference between breaking 1:07 or not. If I don't race with composure and toughness, that's definitely a difference between not breaking 1:07. Just all of the controllable factors in training and racing went almost perfectly for me, along with all of the uncontrollable factors as well, such as weather. And the biggest part of that was me taking advantage of that. So now I'm fully aware that beating a race performance like that at any distance for me is going to be really, really tough. If I have an even better training cycle, maybe my fitness will be better, but maybe the race conditions won't be as good and I won't be able to run as fast. But of course, I'm definitely going to take running the best I possibly can over not running the best I can and making it easier for me to improve on that later. So after cooling down and getting back to my phone, I was so happy to come back to so many YouTube comments of people congratulating me on the race. I know I haven't responded to those yet just because there are so many of them, but believe me, I read all of them and I appreciate every single one of them as well. When I talk about all those stars aligning for me in the race, one of the biggest stars is the support that I get from everybody. That includes family, former teammates, current and former athletes, and definitely all of you guys that have been following this journey on YouTube. Even though I've been self-coached and completed most of my training on my own over the past few years, this whole thing was far from a solo effort. All of this gives me such a greater sense of purpose in the sport that we all love, and I cannot believe that I'm in a position where I can inspire people by just doing what I love to do. So again, thank you to everyone who's provided me with support throughout this journey. I'm going to take some time to enjoy this one quite a bit and just relax and make sure I recover fully before I start seriously thinking about another goal. So I will be concluding this series with one more video, and I'm going to talk about the 10 weeks of training that led up to this half marathon. So until then, thank you everybody.